For many years, Telltale Games was a household name within the gaming industry. Between 2012 and 2016 especially, it was hard not to have heard something about at least one of their flagship titles. The Walking Dead, The Wolf Among Us, Batman. YouTuber giants posted hours and hours of Let's Play videos almost daily, raking in millions of views and skyrocketing the Telltale brand to near legendary status. And this wasn't without reason. Telltale games aren't like your traditional games. There are no twitchy FPS mechanics, there's no pinpoint accurate platforming. Telltale games focus more on telling a cinematic, interactive story, one where your decisions can ideally help shape the outcome and alter the direction in which the story goes. Whilst you can often control your character, it's more akin to a point-and-click adventure game. But because it's presented in a cinematic way, feeling more like a movie where you can choose what to say to people, it appeals to gamers and non-gamers alike.
I have no idea what I'm doing.
Whether you'd played the games or not, you were likely hooked by one of the stories at some point, and it's no wonder that the Let's Play videos became so popular. People that couldn't play the game themselves could simply sit back and enjoy the story, almost as they would with any other film or TV show. And those that had played the games wanted to see how their favourite online personalities altered the story with their own unique decisions. However, like all golden ages, this was not to last. Telltale's fame soon turned to infamy. In an effort to keep up with this perceived rise in demand, they went into factory mode, churning out game after game as quickly as they could. Many of them often feeling repetitive, lacking narrative choice, or just generally feeling uninspired. They weren't all awful, and there were a few diamonds in the rough, but they were certainly starting to feel more than a little formulaic. NoClip, who are an excellent video game documentary channel you should definitely check out, seriously, they do not get enough love for what they produce, put out an insightful documentary regarding the downfall of the developer, who closed its doors back in 2018. You can hear about just how factory-like the whole development process became in far more detail there, but as you may have guessed, that's not exactly what this video is actually about. We're here today to talk about Last Stop. Developed by Variable State, a studio I'd never even heard of before, and published by Annapurna Interactive back in 2021, Last Stop is, to me, a true spiritual successor to the Telltale Games brand, and a prime example of the genre Telltale helped define at its very best. Oh, and it's set in London too, so yay, UK, brat, bottle of water, bruv, in it. I forgot I put that in. Yes, it is first worth mentioning LCG Entertainment has bought the rights to Telltale and is indeed producing new games under the same label, but we get to really see just how that's all going to pan out, although I am hoping to God that Wolf Among Us 2 is good at the very least. So for now, I can confidently say that Last Stop is the best Telltale game since the OG Telltale games stopped being a thing. Still with me? Okay. Last Stop is a game that was very easy to overlook. It had no huge marketing campaign and received generally positive but otherwise fairly average reviews at launch. I'd certainly never heard of it until it showed up on Game Pass, and just gave it a go as I wanted something me and my partner, who's just not the epic gamer that I am, could hopefully experience and enjoy together. For anyone who may have seen my Andor or Cyberpunk videos, you may be unsurprised to hear that what really kept me drawn to this game was its characters, which is fortunate really, seeing as how the gameplay itself is quite simplistic. If these characters weren't interesting, this game would essentially have very little else to stand on. You follow 3 separate stories in Last Stop, each one taking place around the same time and eventually all merging together to form the finale. Each chapter lets you select the order in which you'd like to play the next part of each story, but you'll have to play them all the same either way. I won't spoil how or why they're connected, but let's just say there are some fantastical and sci-fi undertones throughout the narrative that all begin to connect and tie together the more you progress. Oddly, it gave me some similar vibes to certain X-Files or Doctor Who episodes, which was quite a welcome surprise. The Paper Dolls storyline was easily a quick favourite for both me and my partner. The aptly named John Smith, a down-on-his-luck ageing everyman, is immediately likeable, and you very quickly relate to and sympathise with his situation. In this story, John ends up body-swapping with a young, arrogant game programmer called Jack, and as you might expect, wild antics ensue. The body swap story has been done many times before in TV and film, but I'm not sure I've ever seen it explored in an interactive medium in this way.
Where the hell am I? What's up with my voice?
Of the 3 stories, this one is certainly the lightest and most comedic, so it's easy to have a lot of fun with, as both John and Jack try and fail to keep up appearances whilst living out each other's lives. Of course, there are plenty of moments of conflict and peril too, both emotional and physical, littered throughout, keeping the story grounded and nailing down the fact that, whilst this is an undoubtedly fun, quirky situation, for those going through it, it's also sure to be a very difficult, confusing time. As you might expect, the story ultimately revolves around identity, what makes you you, and the morals behind the whole situation. This is brought to a head in the final act of the game, where you're forced to make one last big decision. Again, don't worry, no spoilers. Each story equally focuses on other varying themes, with the implicated morals also being at the forefront of the discussion, culminating in a final choice for each of the characters you've come to know and play as over the course of the game. Domestic Affairs, for instance, follows Mina Hughes, a secret agent of sorts whose employment remains mysterious throughout a large portion of the game. Mina is being assessed for what is clearly shown to be a highly important, highly classified mission, but a new agent poses some competition, and she starts to get paranoid that some of the skeletons in her closet might be uncovered before she gets the gig. Whilst this, on the surface, is all very exciting and intriguing, and relevant to the overarching plot, the heart of Mina's story is found in her home life. Loyalty plays a large part in her overall character development, with family and career constantly being pitted against one another, and the player being given some control over which she leans more closely towards. And finally, there's Stranger Danger. I'd argue that it was the weaker of the three storylines for me. A lot of the plot involves being trapped in one location, which I always feel, in almost any medium, can easily fall into tedium and lack forward momentum if not handled correctly. The characters were also the least interesting to me, but perhaps that's because I'm, well, not a teenager anymore. God, I wish I was. I don't mean to put this storyline down though, it is still entertaining and has some great moments of tension and very light sci-fi horror elements thrown in there as well. You follow Donna, who's going through a little bit of a rebellious streak after having some issues with her family. She and her friends hang out, eventually meeting a mysterious man who, through a series of unfortunate events, they end up capturing and essentially holding prisoner in an old abandoned swimming pool. It would be easy for the teens to quickly seem like the bad guys here, but the game does a good job at justifying their thought processes, and keeps the captured man's intentions just mysterious enough to make you wonder who the real bad guys actually are. Again, there's a strong link to morality presented in this scenario, which of course presents plenty of opportunities for the game to give players various moral decisions to make. Now, I love a good theme, and feel that each of Last Stop's storylines handles those they explore pretty well. They're all unique in their own right, but still have enough cohesion to make them all feel connected in some way. Everything the main characters do, whether they feel it is right or wrong, has a consequence of some kind, and the decisions you make as a player makes it feel like you do have some agency in that. Overall, I feel these are some very strongly written characters who are well voice acted and fit very naturally within the compelling predicaments they find themselves trapped within.
Oddly enough, this is my first time swapping bodies.
Sometimes it takes being trapped for people to find out exactly what kind of person they really are, and it makes perfect sense that a narrative game that's all about making choices focuses on a subject like this. I therefore also feel it holds up very well against the narrative writing in some of Telltale's best games like The Walking Dead or Wolf Among Us, which use similar devices to present the player with compelling options. Sure, the game is a little linear, that would probably be my biggest complaint quite honestly, but it does help ensure the narrative stays on track and that there's a satisfying conclusion, or character arc, for each of its three stories. Telltale games generally only had to concern themselves with one narrative at a time in each of their games, so branching paths were easier, if you can call it easy, to construct, as they didn't need to tie into anything else, as the player carved their own path to a degree. Last Stop gave itself the rather interesting challenge of managing three different stories at once, and whilst the characters are not all immediately connected, they all have to end up at the same point one way or another, otherwise the ending just doesn't really work. Even some of Telltale's later games fell into the trap of simply providing the illusion of choice to the player, so I don't hold this against Last Stop too heavily, as it still manages to tell an entertaining story at the end of the day. And it's not just the story that the game handles well either. The overall setting and the construction of the world and the scenes that take place within it are very well crafted. Going for a slightly more traditional 3D animated look than Telltale's comic-like style, the art direction for Last Stop is clean and unintrusive. Each scene is populated with enough visual information to make the world feel lived in and believable, but not so much that it muddies the frame and distracts from the action taking place. It's not especially stylized in any way, but it's certainly serviceable. Also, having lived in London myself for a couple of years, I can attest to the authenticity of the setting. I always appreciate it when media, in whatever form, is able to portray a location in a genuine way, and make the ordinary extraordinary, or the mundane, well, not mundane. When a lot of people think of London, they of course picture all of the big landmarks and historic settings, or the huge high-rise offices or whatever. But this game, for the most part, is just about everyday people living in the city. And I can tell you from experience that when you live there, you're not exactly jumping out of bed and running to the nearest tourist trap day in, day out. Big Ben only has so much appeal after all. The thing you'll see the most is the housing estate you live on, the corner shop on the neighbouring street, the local park you walk by on the way to work. Last Stop gets that and reflects it in the way in which it chooses to represent London. This is an often overlooked aspect of these types of games, but the ways in which the scenes are shot and composed are very well done here. They often say that if the audience doesn't notice your edits, then you've done your job well. This essentially translates to you having not distracted them from what's going on, and this can certainly be applied to Last Stop. The shots, the sound design, the editing, none of it ever felt out of place or especially awkward. It seems like a small thing, but when done wrong, it can become very noticeable. So it's worth applauding them for this. As I mentioned before, the gameplay itself is quite simple, and pretty similar to Telltale's approach. You can wander about and interact with items of interest, speak to people and make choices, and occasionally might have the odd quick-time event or minigame to complete. And honestly, that's about it. But like I said before, this is part of what makes these types of games accessible to those that may not necessarily play more gamer-type games, so to speak, who just want to enjoy the story without worrying about how accurate their aim is or whatever. There are also some nice little details hidden within this simplistic playstyle that make for some good, oh, that actually did something moments. Once you discover a few of these, you as the player start to think about even some of the simpler actions you take a bit more carefully. Without spoiling too much, the best example I can think of is when you're investigating an apartment that you shouldn't be in. In classic Telltale style, you can walk around and interact with various items throughout the house, opening drawers, checking computers, and all that good Snoopy stuff. I, as the player, knowing I wasn't supposed to be there, decided to close all of the drawers and doors after I'd finished my investigation, and the game actually rewarded me for covering my tracks. Okay, it didn't seem to have a huge impact on the narrative, but it was a nice bit of attention to detail that I just didn't really expect from this type of game. I can't discuss too much more without spoiling parts of the game, so I think I'm going to conclude things here, and hope that this video has inspired some of you OG Telltale lovers out there to scratch that itch and give the game a try. I do personally feel that the characters and their respective narratives are compelling enough to rival some of the best of Telltale's experiences. Maybe not the very best, but certainly some of the good ones. It doesn't quite have the same dramatic weight as something like The Walking Dead or The Wolf Among Us. It's a little more linear and it's not as long either, but for me, that's not such a bad thing, as it never feels like it overstays its welcome. It's an easy game for you, perhaps with a friend, partner or family member, to just jump into, experience and enjoy for yourself, without any huge time or emotional commitment. So if you've been missing the Telltale experience but have no more Telltale games to play, or indeed watch, why not give it a shot? It just might help fill that void. Until The Wolf Among Us 2 comes out anyway. Thank you all as always very much for watching. Obviously do all the YouTubey stuff, like, subscribe, comment, all that fun jazz. I don't think the game is actually on Game Pass anymore, so I'm sorry. I'm not sure exactly how much it costs wherever you are currently, but I would say that for me, if I had to pay for it, I'd probably pay like, 15 quid, 15 pounds, 15 pounds sterling for it. I think it's probably worth about that, so whatever that translates to in your currency. Maybe give it a shot for that. It's like watching a nice TV show or a decent film. It's lighthearted, it's fun. So yeah, give it a shot if you like the sound of it. Or don't if you don't, and tell me how stupid and wrong I am. I look forward to reading that in the comments below. I'll see you there. Also, fuck you.